You know, we got a pretty badass Godzilla.
There's no point in a sequel unless you go deeper, harder, stronger, bigger.
I really want to make a Godzilla film that lives up to the legacy that inspired it.
To keep the things about the original that I loved, while at the same time putting it in this new-looking beast, I get excited when I see him.
It's always scary when you take a character as iconic as Godzilla is and who has the long history that Godzilla has had and put him into a movie that delivers on the scope and scale and fun that modern audiences hope to see in a movie theater. And what was really great about Michael Dougherty's take was his keen understanding for how to make it bigger, how to make it more expansive, how to make it more global, and also how to infuse it with a lot of action.
I had been obsessed with the character, the creature, since I was old enough to walk. I used to draw Godzilla in my grade school Bible, much to the chagrin of my nuns. I've seen every incarnation of the character.
Michael Dougherty is a Godzilla geek and fanatic. It was his obsession as a child.
Can you locate Godzilla?
One of my favorite things about Godzilla is that if you look at sort of the long history of him going back to 1954, you'll see that every filmmaker has put their own stamp on the character, and that includes our movie.
Michael tweaked in with Matt Alsop, who was the creature artist who helped refine the first Godzilla in the previous movie to this.
Gareth's film, 2014, we spent a long time working on Godzilla design, and I really liked what we had. But Mike also had his vision for Godzilla.
I thought Gareth Edwards did a phenomenal job updating Godzilla. At the same time, I just wanted to put my own unique stamp on it. One of the first things that I did was alter his back spikes, because I really loved the spikes from the original film. I thought they're beautifully sculpted, but they also felt like something that nature could have crafted. And so I very simply took a rendering of Godzilla from Gareth's film and just copied and pasted the spikes from the '54 movie onto the back of the modern Godzilla and sent it off to the creature design house and said, it's this. Other than that, we gave him bigger claws because a creature of that size would naturally be a predator.
It's the same Godzilla. The fans will still think he's the same Godzilla. He hasn't changed much, but the super fans will probably notice the small incremental changes we've made just to sort of make him look a little tougher, because the Mutos were a tough enemy. That was just him warming up. That was Godzilla stretching. Like, this time he's really got an enemy to face, and he's bulked up a little bit for it as well.
He's way bigger. This is the biggest I've ever seen Godzilla, height-wise and just solid. You know, he's all muscle.
Is it just me, or has he been working out?
You kidding me? Sarazawa's got that lizard juiced.
So with the new movie, it's really like taking everything that we've learned from that first film with Godzilla and now really getting to play the character to its full potential. And we looked at references of like crocodile and lizard and all sorts of like predators. And then, we looked at people, right? It's like, if, Godzilla faces off another monster, you kind of want this moment to feel like it's a gunslinger moment, right? There's like a look, there's an attitude, he's a bit of a brawler, right? He has like that kind of like aggressive attitude that is not only purely animalistic, but that has like a human side to it.
I thought it was important for the creatures to have a certain amount of human emotion. They shouldn't just be 100% animal. Motion capture is a great way to record the performance of an actor, whether it's their facial expressions or their body language or a combination of the two, and apply it to a digital character. It had to be a sort of perfect combination of human fighting to give it that little extra spark, but also something very feral and animalistic.
You know, for us in visual effects, when we animate those creatures, it's like, well, you know, how do we capture interesting moments, like little accidents or little things that are a bit unexpected? It's all about finding the moments that make a performance interesting.
It's hard to make something as cool as Godzilla cooler. And I think our attempt was to give Godzilla a deeper history and a deeper mythology, and with that personality, to really humanize him and make him a character that we could fall in love with.
I like the idea that Godzilla is older and wiser than we give him credit for. It was important to me that we crafted a story that included moments where we got to see Godzilla's intelligence. I think you can see that when Godzilla bends down to look at a small cluster of human beings on the edge of a submarine.
Nobody move!
There's a moment of recognition there. You can see that he is thinking, he's comprehending, and he's a very curious and intelligent creature.
Godzilla's radiation levels are going through the roof. We got about 12 minutes before he goes thermonuclear.
Atomic Meltdown Godzilla actually has its roots in the old Godzilla films. You know, I think every sequel you're expected to sort of up the ante a little bit. We had to find some new, visually spectacular way to have him defeat King Ghidorah that modern audiences hadn't seen before.
He's using the energy that he feeds off of as a weapon. So essentially it's Godzilla distilled down to his most powerful essence.
Godzilla's radiation's reaching critical mass. 6 minutes until he blows.
I see that moment as Serizawa's sacrifice realized.
Whatever Serizawa did to Godzilla worked a little too well, because he's about to explode like an atom bomb.
If you watch the film, you'll see that when this sort of radioactive pulse explodes out of his body, there's a trace of Mothra's wing patterns in the energy bubble. It was because of Mothra's death, her sacrifice, that allowed him to become overcharged. So in a lot of ways, it's sort of the perfect symbiotic relationship between him and Mothra. He couldn't possibly defeat King Ghidorah if it wasn't for Mothra's noble self-sacrifice. There are so many moments where Mothra almost steals the movie from me. She's meant to convey a sense of awe and wonder that you don't necessarily have with the other creatures.
I think Mothra will be everybody's favorite monster, at least in their hearts. She is pure good in a lot of ways, and her intention is to take care, to regenerate, to grow.
Mothra was the biggest challenge because it was probably the most back and forth in terms of design to get it right.
You want her to be feminine, but powerful. You want her to have a benevolence, but she's also badass. So visualizing all of that takes everybody working really hard to pull that off.
Meet Titanus Mosura, or as we like to call her,
Mothra.
Something that was really important to me in bringing these characters to life was to stay true to the original films. And there are certain traits that you have to embrace. The fact that Mothra hatches from a giant egg, and her first form is a sort of larval caterpillar. She then enters a cocoon. She hatches from that cocoon as a full-grown, beautiful adult form. And in all the previous films, going back to her original debut, she was worshipped as a goddess. And so that informed how we went about her design. Mothra's a challenge because in the past films, she's essentially just a giant, colorful moth.
She's a giant moth, and it's like, how do you make that look cool and interesting?
But if you go back and you look at moths in nature, they're very diverse. They're beautiful animals. They're not the moths that typically fly out of your clothes in the closet. They're not just these ugly little brown specks. They're just as beautiful and elegant as butterflies. Because Mothra is one of the few female titans, she had to have a feminine quality. I wanted to come up with something that made her feel truly angelic. And so we brought in elements of bioluminescence, which is something that is found frequently throughout nature and seemed like the perfect fit for Mothra. She uses bioluminescence and different colors and brightness to communicate her emotions.
Mike had that from day one. Like, he knew that's what he wanted it to look like.
I felt that Mothra shouldn't just be a moth, that she should embody the traits of a lot of different insects.
We did look at creatures like the praying mantis, because they're quite elegant, but they're also incredibly deadly.
This might sound strange. I'm a huge fan of Mother Nature and insects especially. I mean, I hatch praying mantises every spring just for fun. And praying mantises are beautiful insects. And so I wanted to embody some of the different traits that other insects have in nature, including different physical capabilities for defense or attack. Longer legs, claws. I want to come up with something that was beautiful and angelic and powerful, but also deadly when she needed to be. Because if any animal is going to survive in a world filled with other giant monsters, like Rodan, King Ghidorah, or Godzilla, they would have certain defense mechanisms, which is why we gave her a stinger.
Beautiful.
Mothra's got a really interesting soundscape.
It's like a song.
She is a mix of different kinds of insects. Something that we listened to as an example were the sounds of crickets that were slowed down exponentially to the point where when you hear them, it almost sounded like an angelic chorus. And I think she uses sound as a method of communication even more than the other creatures do.
She has the most vocal range, to me, out of all the creatures, because she goes through her own development from the larva stage to a beautiful butterfly or moth. Her vocalization changes along the way. And she's the only creature that really gives an inviting sound.
Whether it's the chittering, the screeches, there's something very pleasant and musical about the way that she sounds. You could almost put it on in the background as like Zen ambient music if you wanted to.
We wanted it to feel in some way like Mother Earth calling out to us.
Mothra, queen of the monsters.
There's a very noble quality to Mothra. Unlike all the other creatures, Mothra had an intelligence and a sense of kindness about her, that she was Mother Nature's protector. Every time she shows up in the story, it changes the energy of the movie. everything becomes figuratively and literally brighter. I was already in love with Mothra before we started the movie, and then as it progressed, I only fell in love with her even more. Godzilla fans have very high expectations and demands for King Ghidorah, and he's just as beloved as Godzilla himself. You literally have two kings squaring off against each other.
That's the Super Bowl to a Godzilla fan.
Any fan needs to be able to see it and say that's King Ghidorah. But at the same time, you want that modern, realistic interpretation of that.
Whether it was visual design of the creature or his performance, his sound, we had to be willing to push the boundaries a little bit.
Ghidorah, the one who's many. He's not part of our natural order, and he's not meant to be here.
A false king.
There are certain traits, certain strands of DNA that have persisted in every incarnation of the character from his first introduction back in the 60s. He's golden, 3 heads, very strange bat-like wings, and a very distinct cackle. King Ghidorah very clearly has his origins in the legendary Greek Hydra, but the way that he looks is based more on Eastern mythology. If you really look at his head, his facial features, his horns, even his scales, and just the overall flow of his body, it's very much an Eastern dragon, which is distinct from Western style.
Ghidorah for me was the scariest one of all of them because each head has a character and a different personality and a different roar.
It was important to me that King Ghidorah display a certain amount of intelligence and ferocity and really give him a personality. So we took 3 very talented performance capture artists and essentially tied them together so that each head would have its own individual reactions during a confrontation. Motion capture is a great way to record the performance of an actor, whether it's their facial expressions or their body language or a combination of the two, and apply it to a digital character. In a lot of ways, it was like we were going back to the techniques they used from the 50s to the 70s. You're still relying on the performances of human actors to bring these 350-foot-tall creatures to life. So it was sort of the modern way of doing a man in a rubber suit.
There's a few little moments in the movie where you get to see the 3 of his personalities interact. And for me, those are the moments where I can emotionally connect to him.
The center head is the very serious alpha who really calls the shots. And then the head on the right was always a bit more aggressive, tenacious, the one sort of itching to get into the fight. The head on the left, we saw as a very sort of curious, almost inquisitive head, who is a little bit more playful. So in Antarctica, for example, when he first rises up out of the ice, there's a moment when he spots human soldiers firing guns at him. Now, he's been asleep for millions of years, so theoretically, he's never seen this before. So instead of just creating a moment where he just steps on them or blasts them, I wanted to just have the briefest moment where he sort of bends down out of curiosity and sort of just sniffs them out before ultimately deciding okay, these guys suck. Let me just get them out of the way, and he just completely fries them.
Oh, shit.
But even then, one of my favorite moments actually is when he bends down and sort of just licks the corpses of the soldiers that were there.
And then the alpha head in the middle yells at him and nudges him, tells him to stop.
The center head is always the one that's trying to get the other heads back on track. It's a bit like the Three Stooges.
What about Mo, Larry, and Curly over here?
But it really did help the visual effects artists, the creature animators, to give it just a little bit of an extra spark. With King Ghidorah, we went back and listened to all the original cries and roars and screeches from the classic Toho movies and try to come up with something that was familiar and tip the hat to those cries, but also was something fresh and original. And so we went to an animal wrangler and recorded the sounds of snakes hissing, a rattlesnake. So it was a lot of fun to try to create something that was unique and modern, but also harken back to the old school movies to satisfy the fans. From the first time we see him in the movie, I wanted to make sure that the audience knew that we were dealing with something very different than what Godzilla had faced in the previous film. Rodan is a really fun character to bring to life. He brings a sense of power and speed that some of the other Godzilla creatures don't have. The ferocity of a creature of that scale that could fly has never really been truly captured. He could use his wind to just swoop over a city and completely decimate it. We called him the King of the Skies. Rodan is one of my all-time favorites because he could fly, and I was really into the idea of introducing him to the mix because we could then have some really potent aerial battles. Whether it's Rodan fighting the Air Force or Rodan fighting Mothra or fighting King Ghidorah, he brought a whole new axis to the film.
Rodan was a tricky one because we'd already had a flying creature in the previous film. We'd had the Muto. We didn't want it to look the same or similar to the Muto. The first few sketches almost looked like the Muto again. So it was just finding a design that felt fresh, but recognizable as Rodan.
We went back and looked at the original movies. We started with the silhouette. And with Rodan, the color palette was a sort of burgundy red color palette. 2 horns on the head, sometimes 3, but usually 2. He had a very spiky chest, and he always had a sort of more bird-like appearance than Godzilla or any of the other creatures.
As I was working, Mike would always be texting me pictures. And I remember for Rodan, when I was doing some early keyframes and storyboards, there was a lot of reference of the vulture, especially for the face.
So everything from vultures, eagles, hawks, tried to look at their body language, their claws, their eyes, and we're talking about a creature which in our film has been hibernating inside of a volcano. So instead of having traditional reptilian scales, this creature has managed to adapt to living inside of a volcano by sort of growing an outer shell of volcanic rock.
It's got this like molten, hard flesh to it that's reminiscent of the volcano, the environment it comes from. And I think that really made the design unique.
And then on top of that, we went out and recorded the sounds of owls, penguins, a vulture named Steve. We're trying to record his sounds, and he's going after the toes and legs of our recordists. And then my favorite addition, my mom has a group of cranes that visit her in Florida every now and then. So she is constantly sending me video clips of these cranes. And so I sent the video clips to my sound guys, and they added some of those clicks and vocalizations to Rodan's cries. So thanks, Mom. He's a fascinating character to me because his loyalties are vague. You're not quite sure which direction he's going to go in. In some of the previous films, he's Godzilla's ally, sometimes not. Much like Ghidorah, I wanted to get a sense that there was sort of a dark intelligence in his eyes.
My favorite performance moment of Rodan is in the chase sequence outside of Isla de Mar, where he's doing his best to dismantle all the different jets. And there's this moment of understanding where he shows his intelligence, where there's a plane trying to veer away from him, and he side-eyes the plane. And it's this moment where he knows more than we do, and then he goes into this barrel roll spin, and in one move, obliterates the entire fleet. It points to a deeper intelligence, a deeper personality.
I think that's what makes him really unique and special.